How is everyone doing today, ladies and gentlemen? It's Brandon DeCruz, myself, Jeff Black. We're back with another episode of Chasing Clarity Health and Fitness Podcast, episode 27. This one's gonna be a really cool topic for you guys because I know we haven't even covered it over at the Excellence Cartel or anything I've been doing. I've been part of podcasting for a couple of years, like Brandon. But we're gonna talk about stubborn body fat breakdown and kind of like the underneath stuff of like understanding fat storage patterns and the stages of fat loss. So we've got a really cool one your way. And then while we're at it, if you guys could like share, subscribe, like, tag us, tell us we're beautiful, tell us you fucking hate us. I don't care, whatever it takes, but get us out there. We could really use all the help because, we're a funded by you all project. So we appreciate you guys tuning in and sharing us and subscribing and ranking us. And I don't know, I'm prettier than Brandon, so I won't get into all that. But with that being said, Brandon, how's your last 7 days been, man?
And my last 7 days have been great, my friend. As I mentioned during our last episode, and as I was telling you off air, last week I transitioned out of a deficit. So this was my first full week of being back to maintenance calories. And honestly, man, I'm already feeling a ton better. Like, I'm someone that I get so locked into a dieting phase, into a fat loss phase, that I often ignore some of my biofeedback. Like, I obviously track these markers, but I don't let my subjective feelings get come into play. So when I feel low energy or I feel high hunger, I'm an experienced dieter. I'm someone that, I've done 15 preps, over 100 photo shoots. Like, this is something that it's second nature to me. So I often don't listen to my feelings, my emotions, or let those things come into play. And honestly, just I guess I didn't notice how low my energy was, and like some of the things that were kind of like falling by the wayside. So the increase in energy availability really has allowed me to not only drop a ton of diet fatigue that I was feeling, but over the last week, the extra calories have literally helped like every aspect of my life, man. Like, I'm feeling more well fueled when I go into my training sessions. I'm recovering better. Like, I'm
Good for
noticing
you.
less soreness. I'm having much less food focus. So that's been reduced. I'm better able to manage my hunger. I've even noticed like other aspects of my energy expenditure, which everyone very well as the listeners of the show. I'm very on top of my NEAT and stuff, but there's other aspects of NEAT and of our total daily energy expenditure that gets down regulated during a diet. Even like my ability to get steps, I would notice during the latter course of the latter portion of the diet, it was getting later and later in the day, and I still hadn't hit my step count for the day. I was just subconsciously getting lazier, being more tired, being more lethargic, and even like my ability to be lively on consultation calls had went down. So it's funny, I did a podcast actually on Friday with one of my clients and someone that runs a podcast, Jeremiah Bear, and he just posted a reel from it. And the first thing I noticed was I was back to using like my regular and usual hand gestures during the conversation, which honestly, I looked back at some of the videos that I've done since I was in a dieting phase. And that's honestly something that I unconsciously stopped doing during a deficit. So overall, I'm feeling good, very happy to be feeling good. I'm taking advantage of it, especially as I'm in the portion of my maintenance phase where my physique actually looks better right now than it did, prior to going back to maintenance calories, pretty much due to the fact that I've started to replenish glycogen storages. I'm filling back out, but I'm just nearly just as lean as I was at the peak of my fat loss phase. So I have a few more shoots. I'm going to, check those off the box, and then, look towards, fully recovering obviously from the diet itself, and then going into a nice long building phase. But honestly, I was telling you off air, but this was the first weekend in months where I've traveled up to a new spot to go hiking. And hiking is one of my favorite hobbies. It always has been. It's something that my girl and I used to do almost every single weekend. So we'd find it like a new destination hiking spot. And on this, like, there's this NJ Trails app that she always follows, and it's like these beautiful destinations and stuff. And we would always go and spend the day hiking and exploring the area. But the last month or so, I've just been so low. I just like in energy, I just didn't have the gas in the tank, to be honest with you. Like, I didn't want to get stranded out in the wilderness for 3 or 4 hours, like, looking for some carbs. And so it was just nice to get back out into nature for a few hours at the time and have the energy to get outdoors, which A, I love first and foremost, and B, it is getting cold out here in the Northeast, my man. I woke up, obviously I'm a very early riser, so I went out to do fasted cardio yesterday, and it was 4 a.m. And obviously that's early in the day, but it was 34 degrees, and that shit hit me like a brick wall. It was, we say up here, it's cold as brick. So I'm looking forward to, taking advantage of the next few weekends. We have a bunch of family events, a bunch of things that we're doing, Halloween parties coming up, different events, her birthday's coming up, which we have a big celebration for. So I have a lot of things in the pipeline, but we're going to be trying to get back to our usual weekend, hiking spots and our hiking trips, because that's something we really like. It's just nice to get out into nature. There's a greenhouse effect of being out in greenery, and it's just something that we like to do that's active. It keeps our mind like, it gets away from social media and all, like, we turn off our phones for a few hours. We just get out into nature. We talk, we, engage with one another. This weekend, we hiked all the way out to the furthest destination within the spot that we went to. And we saw like waterfalls and stuff, and no one was there because A, no one's crazy enough to walk that far. And B, it was pretty treacherous to get through. So we're lucky we didn't break our necks, but it's just an activity that I really like. I'm a big outdoors guy, so I want to take advantage of it, because before you know it, in the Northeast, unlike in Tennessee, it will be winter. So I got to take advantage of these next few weekends, do some fall festivities, apple picking, pumpkin picking, things of that sort.
I gotta see you pick a fucking apple.
Bro, I'm an absurd apple picker first and foremost, because I love
absurd,
apples.
like,
and then I'm so tall that I can get all the great ones. Because think about it, most people are short. They either need to get a ladder.
Hey, I am offended by your height comment there, sir.
They're picking from a very small selection right on the bottom, but I get those upper ends. So I take full advantage. So you got to use this height for something. Anytime I'm in a store or I'm at like a family occasion, they're always like, the first thing they look over is at me to like get things from high reaching places. I'm in the store, old women are asking me to get things from the top shelf. Like, got to take advantage of it. So
I know I do the same to you. If it was you and I out, I'd be like, hey Brandon, can you go grab that for me?
I'd be getting the stuff in your top pantry, or I would be putting everything up.
You'd be put up there and be like, look at the bigs and try to get it.
So what's going on with your week, my man?
Dude, man, it was very low key. Went out, had a great dinner Saturday night, celebrating just some different things. Watched my Vols whip some ass on LSU. Just very low key. I'm traveling this weekend for a wedding for one of my clients and good friends is getting married. So I just made sure, to kind of just sit back and enjoy stuff. Our good friend Laura Conlin, be in town. I'm hanging out with her Friday night and some people at this like Halloween thing, and then we're gonna go catch the Trivium Whitechapel concert. So some good old metal shows. Otherwise, with business, man. So I was talking with my team, and we decided to just go ahead and put all the funds of Relentless into professional videos. So we are gonna start doing like retreats where, say for example, I'll get 10 videos, put the topics, and then the team is going to vote on the videos that we want to shoot first as we start building out the Relentless channel. But as you know, Jason Coley came down as the director of training for Relentless. And
how has his first couple of weeks been?
Dude, it's been good, man.
Good transition.
Yeah, it's different because he's not used to seeing the small group model that we run. We're training a few people's time, and me and him agree we could tighten some things up. But overall, you know how I am. I'm very much like I like to hire entrepreneurs to work with me. To develop things that they're passionate about underneath the umbrella that I work with. So I'm really looking forward, man. His first video turned out super sharp. Like the videographer is really, really good. I was like, all right. Awesome. Yeah, we also got John Michael's backup. So be looking on our Relentless channel, because Jason's going to be putting up like a whole bunch of like activation stuff, stretch stuff, exercise stuff, just things to help people understand clearly and a little bit better how to execute on things. So man, in all honesty, my world is pretty good. Like Keegan had his best set of grades he's ever had. So kind of some parenting wins there and all that. And I'm looking at buying a new car. I think I'm going to get that in the next few months. So I'm just waiting.
Is there anything in mind?
Yeah. So I have a vision board, and I created this vision board, and the second night that I was on my friend's floor 12 years ago, the first night I was like, I'll never fucking be in this position again. The second night I started visualizing, and it's a Toyota Supra. And so I'm going to get myself one. I found a 2022 A91 CF edition. So it's turboed and everything. So when you come down here, I know you're very tall, so we'll figure out how to get you in the car.
Is it a 2-seater?
It's a 2-seater, so it's gonna be great.
I knew that.
I am gonna take video of you getting in it and be like, look at this Lord, little bastard trying to drive it.
I hope you have like a drop top. Dear Lord, I'm gonna
it's gonna be funny as hell.
The sunroof.
I know. I can't wait to see you in my Jeep. You'll be like, your head will be over the damn windshield. But nonetheless, so I'm gonna do that. And that's actually, if you want to know something funny, that is the last item on my vision board. that I created 12 years ago. So I'll have to sit down and create a whole nother one.
Absolutely.
I
Well,
don't even
I'm
know
sure.
I don't even know what I
Now,
want to
let
do
me
either.
ask you this. Obviously, one of your projects that's been in play, and obviously I know this as well as the
Yeah.
audience knows this, is Iron House 2. Was that
Yeah.
on your initial vision board, or
No, I
was
never had a gym anywhere on my vision board.
that's what I was wondering?
Yeah.
That's
I
awesome.
wanted to be debt free, which I am. With the exception of a house, I hold no debts. My companies hold no debts. So I wanted to achieve all that and just some odds and end things that I said I would do. I did. And I'm pretty proud of it. So,
On to the next phase, my man.
yeah, I know. I'm trying to figure out what I want to do next. But nonetheless, that's a good problem to have. So I just want to remind everybody, if you're listening and your life sucks and you're down in the dumps today, you can take decisive action and create a whole new future for yourself. It's just a matter of the want to. Everything's about the want to. But otherwise, all's well in my world, man. Hey, real quick, we need to talk about the PEC 7 in Tampa.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So, guys, Brandon and me, we will be presenting for the Physique Education Collective. It is something that the Excellence Cartel puts on. That's actually, me and Brandon were chatting long before he ever came on the podcast, but just how he is, he's going to be presenting. What are you thinking you're going to present on again? What's the topic?
So what I'm looking to do is optimizing insulin sensitivity and managing blood glucose. And that's two topics that I'm extremely passionate about. I come from a history and a family of diabetics first and foremost, and tracking blood glucose and optimizing insulin sensitivity has been something that I've taken a keen interest in the last 10 years. First and foremost, I've mentored under a lot of physicians within the realm of endocrinology about blood sugar management, and then also tracking blood sugar management is something that I've been doing with myself for 10 years. And then also with my athletes, I started to employ glucometer readings and things of that sort since 2015. So I have a buttload of biometric data, all this information that I've collected, seminars that I've been to on it, different different methods of utilizing it, but not only to manage insulin sensitivity, but to look at it from a metric to measuring stress, autonomic nervous system balance. There's so many aspects of it. And it's also one of the number one metabolic health markers that we can look at in terms of your fasted blood glucose, your HbA1c, your fasted insulin, your C-peptide, all these different markers. So I really want to delve into it because it is something that us as coaches could really do justice to our clients by learning it. And then even just a general population client, like I was telling you before, I actually made an error on our previous podcast. I said that 8% of Americans were shown to be metabolically healthy in the most recent meta-analysis on this, and it's actually 6.4%. So it's actually less than I thought when I reanalyzed the data or the study. And so really we have an epidemic of metabolic syndrome, which is, one of the key markers of metabolic syndrome is a fasted blood glucose in the pre-diabetic range, which is over 100 milligrams per deciliter. But here's the thing, there's data that shows that for every milligram per deciliter, over 85 milligrams per deciliter of fasted blood glucose that you're at, you have a 6% higher predisposition to type 2 diabetes in the next 10 years. We're looking at statistics that within the next 10 years, by 2030, that half of people will be pre-diabetic or type 2 diabetic, and even a higher proportion of that will be suffering from metabolic syndrome, because metabolic syndrome just isn't glycemic, or dysregulation and glycemic variability, but it's also high triglycerides, high blood lipids, high blood pressure. So there's so many markers that we need to look at. B, we're suffering as a society, and C, it's stuff that you can optimize it for yourself and for clients. You can improve your nutrient partitioning as well as your metabolic health. And it's something that everyone should be looking into, especially in terms of their blood work, because these are things that we could pull up just on a regular CBC and a CMP profile, which most people have covered through their insurance. So I want to not only dive into the basics and what people should really be tracking, but some of the more nuanced topics regarding how to measure it, how to manage it, and then how to improve upon it. So I'm really looking forward to that.
I would love to see some case studies on that. I think as a coach, like a lot of coaches will dig that. The other thing I really liked is how you brought up the autonomic dysregulation side of blood glucose. Because I know for me, when I use ashwagandha and phosphoserine and things like that, those impact my blood sugar usually more than berberine or the other stuff from what I've seen. And I've seen that in some scenarios. So I'll be interested to see how you present that and talk about.
Yeah, that could be definitely a sign of sympathetic dominance,
Yeah.
because if we think about cortisol, a lot of people look at cortisol, it is a stress hormone, but they look at this as like this demonized hormone. And really it's an energy liberation hormone. So it is liberating glucose into the bloodstream to be burned off as energy. The issue is that we have, kind of disentangled our evolutionary mechanism. So when we used to get that blood glucose elevation from cortisol being elevated, it used to be as a fight or flight response. We would do
Yeah.
something with that energy. We would liberate that glucose. Now it just stays floating in your bloodstream. And that's what leads to hyperinsulinemia, which is the heightened levels of insulin needed to clear out that blood glucose and put it back into muscle and liver cells. And so a lot of people, they're highly stressed. They have autonomic nervous system balance. They're in a state of fight or flight. They're chronically in the state of sympathetic dominance, and that is one of the key contributors to insulin resistance. So it's not only energy excess, it is high stress and it's inflammation, and those are the three key indicators. So I really want to take a dive into insulin resistance as well, because a lot of people think of that as a carb issue, like, oh, I've overeaten carbs. But actually, if we look at
No, it's
the
true.
actual data on it, there's actually more linkage to when people overfeed on saturated fat, it induces insulin resistance quicker than overfeeding on carbohydrates. So there's a lot of misnomers, there's a lot of myths. So I look forward
Can't
to diving
wait.
deep onto the topic and really pulling back the layers of the onion on a topic that could really help people both in terms of their body composition, their performance, as well as their health.
Oh, dude, I can't wait. So Brandon will be presenting. We got Jason Theobald presenting, Jeffrey Sue will be presenting, Austin Stout. Austin's doing methylation. Me and him talked about it. He
Very
presented
nice.
me cool. I'm like, I think that'd be a good one because a lot of people don't know really like what the fuck it
Mhm.
is. Like I've even read the books on it and it's still somewhat confusing because it's just so much, I think, that's nuanced and things like that, that you have to tease out because of it. We
Absolutely.
also have the man, Alan Aragon, joining us, Laura Conlin, and then we have Dr. Scott Stevenson closing on Saturday. Scott brought the fire and the thunder when he was here in Nashville. And then Erin from my team, Relentless Forever, will be presenting on fertility. She's taking my spot. And I will be running the PEC for this one. So if you guys are interested in seeing me present, I'm a part of the coaching consortium that's going on a week before, and that's an online only event. I will be smoking a cigar, drinking bourbon at 8 a.m. on a Saturday in silky PJs because that's what the audience asked for. And then let's see, I'm waiting on one more confirmation, which we might swap out the person, but otherwise our ticket's set. It'll be going on sale in the next few weeks. So be looking for that. And yeah, man, be sure to join us, guys. It's a chance to connect. We always have a great time at these events, and everybody just loves what we're doing. And then to Brandon, to answer your question, Dr. Bill Campbell is on the next one. He
Very
cannot do
nice.
this
Okay.
one because this is his birthday weekend. And I
Oh,
was
very
like,
nice. I was going to say it's going to be
I
convenient
understand, bro.
too.
I know, I understand. So
Only one individual will go to the PC on their birthday weekend.
and that's you. Yeah. And like he was like, hey, my family always plans stuff that I was like, oh, dude, I totally get it. He's like, next one I'm in. I'm like, next one we'll make it. And like, so it'll be cool. But nonetheless, guys, look for more information on that. Interesting joining us in Tampa, January 27th, 28th. I'll probably be getting there on that Wednesday. So if you want to drink and smoke with me, I'll be in town. But let's get into the topic today since we got rid of all our house cleaning stuff, and be sure to share and like this podcast and subscribe. Thanks. We're going to talk about stubborn body fat breakdown. A lot of people ask, like, why do I store my fat on my hips? Or why do I store my fat in my belly? Why is it, like guys, why is it in my titty region or, upper scap? I mean, it's all over the place. People just don't like where they hold body fat. For me, it's all my lower back. Like I'm just like, but it is what it is. But we figured today we would talk about like why your body wants to use those fat storage patterns. Like why does it do that? And then the different stages of fat loss. So first off, we think it's very important that we probably talk about the different types of body fat because there are different types of body fat. You got visceral, you've got subcutaneous, among others. So I'm going to let Brandon take it over. But guys, I think this one's going to be really good for ladies and guys, all who are listening, because this is a topic that a lot of people are confused about, and how it really rolls. So Brandon, roll it.
All right. So guys, this week we're going to be covering a deep dive into the science of body fat. And, the topic of body fat, fat loss, and avoiding fat gain are three of the subjects we as coaches get the most questions about, both from our clients and then also from the listeners of the show, which is why we've done several episodes so far on it, such as when we discussed the various factors that impact our body fat levels and the body fat and body fat settling point theories with Eric Helms, which was one of our best, reviewed episodes and viewed episodes so far. And then we also did follow-up episodes where we looked at fat loss dieting strategies. And we also did one on avoiding the post-diet fat regain period. Now, last week, I was just telling Jeff this earlier today, I did a Q&A on my Instagram. I got a ton of additional questions regarding different aspects of body fat, fat loss, and specifically on stubborn body fat and fat distribution patterns. So this week we decided to do a deep dive on the topic of body fat and go really deep into it. So before we get into the subject of stubborn body fat in and of itself and what causes it, it's important to realize that not all body fat is the same, as there's multiple types of fat that we can accrue and carry. There are many types of fat, including essential fat, subcutaneous fat, brown adipose tissue, visceral fat, and intramuscular triglycerides. But the three that we really need to focus on when it comes to understanding what influences the body fat level we're able to get to and how to improve our body composition and metabolic health through fat loss are essential body fat, subcutaneous body fat, and visceral fat. So those are the three that we're going to dive in deep this week because it has the most practical application to the audience. So first, essential fat. Essential fat is the body fat that's needed for our survival, hence the reason why it's referred to as essential fat. This is the type of fat we cannot get rid of, as we honestly wouldn't be able to function without it. Now, essential fat levels differ between both men and women, with males having an essential body fat level of around 3%, whereas females have about 9 to 12% essential body fat. Now, females have a higher essential body fat level due to the fact that they need more stored energy for reproduction, for childbearing, and also for their hormonal function. And it's really important to realize the differences in essential body fat levels between males and females, as this is one component which will impact the total amount of body fat each gender will hold and be able to get to. So even for example, even if we had a male and a female that are just as lean as each other, say they're two, we have a contest prep female and then a lean, fitness model male, and they have this, visually they look like they have the same amount of body fat. They're just as lean as one another. The female will technically have higher body fat percentage than the male due to the fact that they have a higher level of essential body fat. So often, sometimes I'll have females that I work with that don't realize this, and they'll tell me, hey, I want to get to 10% body fat. I've heard that's a really good body fat level. Yes, for a male, that's a lean body fat percentage, but you would be in the levels of essential body fat. Like that is not an attainable, that wouldn't be a healthy body fat percentage to aim for, nor is it attainable. So we have to realize the differences between genders in terms of essential body fat and the roles that these things play. Now, the next is subcutaneous body fat, which is the fat that's under the skin. And when most of us think of the body fat we want to lose, it's the fat that's visible and jiggles, which is this subcutaneous body fat. And so our subcutaneous fat stores account for the largest amount of fat on the body in most individuals. Now, the last type of fat that's relevant to focus on when it comes to fat loss is visceral fat. And visceral fat is fat stored, around the internal organs and gut. And it's usually around vital organs such as the liver, the stomach, and the intestines. And visceral fat is the fat type that's most deleterious to our health. So it's the most harmful to our health because, even in comparison to subcutaneous fat, due to the fact that visceral fat is closely associated with increasing insulin resistance and has also been linked to increased risk of several chronic diseases such as heart disease, so cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, and metabolic syndrome.
I have a question. Let's talk about this real quick. Do you think enhanced athletes, let's break this down. You have people on TRT therapy, men and women. What do you think about the visceral fat gain? Do you work with them on that? Because some people will tend to get, with women, I've seen where TRT clinics will push them up to 200 and 300 total testosterone level, right? And then they start getting visceral body fat. You could see they're thickening it up in areas. Do you think that's something that the industry isn't talking about? That you could get more visceral body fat from using gear and different things like that, combined with the heavy food intake and all that stuff?
So that's actually been shown in testosterone, testosterone replacement therapy, but in exogenous testosterone use in super physiological doses. And generally that is not only due to increasing testosterone levels, but due to the use of aromatase inhibitors. So when we look at females and males, we see that males tend to have a higher proportion of visceral adipose tissue
Right.
when they gain excessive fat. So keep in mind, guys, you're not going to gain visceral fat out of nowhere. But if you are to gain an excessive amount of weight and an excessive amount of body fat, men are more predisposed to storing visceral adipose tissue, which is why we see like the beer belly. That's one thing that's commonly linked. Like alcohol, excessive alcohol consumption is a key influence or a key indicator for visceral fat accumulation. So gaining of visceral adipose tissue. Now, what we see is women are less likely. So we'll go into this later on with fat storage patterns, but women are less likely to carry visceral adipose tissue. And the reason for that is the differences in hormones.
Correct.
So estrogen is more insulin, it insulin sensitizes you. So the presence of having higher estrogen, which is the or the female dominant hormone, actually, first of all, protects their metabolic health and lowers their amount of visceral stored adipose tissue. However, if we were to look at even the life cycle of a female, when is she most predisposed to visceral fat accumulation? It's after menopause.
After menopause, when testosterone spikes.
Not only that, but it's actually the decline in estrogen. So it's never just one. We have to realize that these hormones are never good or bad. It is in the amount and the devil's in the dose, both in terms of the levels that you have, physiologically, meaning naturally, and then exogenously. So you take from another product, an injection, things of that sort. So what we see is in males that utilize testosterone in conjunction with aromatase inhibitors, so they are blocking the aromatization of testosterone to estrogen, they're more likely to accumulate visceral adipose tissue. So that is something that if you are utilizing testosterone and you're utilizing such a high dose that you feel the need to utilize an aromatase inhibitor, or you're just at a, one of those cookie cutter, run-of-the-mill testosterone clinics that gives every single person that comes in 200 milligrams of testosterone and a mg of anastrozole or Remedex, twice per week, which is like that common protocol, which is erroneous because that's not what's in the research, but nor here nor there, you are going to be more predisposed towards visceral adipose tissue accumulation. Now, the issue with that is that's not something we're going to see generally on a bod pod. We're not going to see that on most of our anthropometric. So really how you're going to have to track that is through your waist circumference. So one of the key indicators of metabolic syndrome is an expansion of the waist. So in males, I want to say it's a waist over 40 inches, and with females, it's over 35 inches. And you'll notice those that have higher visceral adipose tissue will have a larger waist. And the reason for that is because visceral adipose tissue is that fat tissue that's stored around the central region. So it's expanding your waist, your stomach cavity, and things of that sort. So really, one of the number one things that you want to look at is your waist circumference in terms of determining, I'm starting to gain weight, or I'm excessively drinking alcohol, or I'm on, I'm utilizing exogenous androgens, and now I'm seeing my waist increase. That might be an indicator, hey, listen, I should really pay more attention to this and start looking to modify what I'm doing from a protocol perspective, but also you should be looking at your markers of insulin resistance, because visceral adipose tissue is closely linked to insulin resistance. So when you are accumulating visceral adipose tissue, it is making, really what happens with visceral adipose tissue, we'll go into how fat is mobilized later on, but essentially visceral adipose tissue essentially leaks out fatty acids into bloodstream at all times. Now, what ends up happening is if you're not in a deficit, if you're in a surplus, you're not burning off. So you're mobilizing fat out of a fat cell, but it's just staying free floating in the blood. So you're getting higher levels of blood lipids, but also now it's getting reesterified, which is the process of taking fat and taking it from the blood and putting it back into different areas. So where it will go will be stored in muscle. So now you'll have more intramuscular triglycerides. Now you will have more lipid accumulation in liver, which makes liver insulin resistant. So now you're in a predisposed to more insulin resistance. So then you would see increases in fasted blood glucose. You would see your HbA1c, which is a 3-month marker, a longer-term marker of your blood glucose levels throughout the course of the day. And then you'll also see your fasting insulin starting to rise. So these are all indications that if you're actually increasing insulin resistance while being on exogenous testosterone and you're, eating in a surplus, these are all indicators, hey, this could be, and now mind you, I'm saying could be, because we don't have clear markers on this. This could be an indication that I'm gaining visceral adipose tissue, especially if you see that there's a concomitant rise in your waist circumference. And these are all things that, we would want to check with a client and, make sure that they're doing things by the most efficacious and healthiest way possible.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. I wanted to bring that up because that's something that I think that a lot of people don't know, that there is some risk you have to be, consider with what you're doing when you take the hormones. And like you said,
now, And the reason I say it's not independent, so we can't look at hormones in isolation, is because actually, if you were to have low testosterone, you would be more predisposed as a male to actually store visceral adipose tissue because of the imbalance in hormones. So we actually see that when men go from low testosterone to testosterone replacements, they're still within the healthy physiological range, which is generally, 300 to 1,000 nanograms per deciliter. We actually see that when they go to the upper end of the range, that they actually lose visceral fat. And we can lose visceral fat. This is another very interesting thing about visceral fat. It's so easy to mobilize. And we're going to go into more of the mechanisms of fat loss, but I'm speaking about there's something called the redistribution of fat tissue. So we can actually, through exercise and through dietary interventions, even at energy balance, meaning at maintenance of our current body weight, we can redistribute how body fat is stored. So you can actually take, because visceral body fat is so easy to liberate, there's a lot of blood flow to the area. And like I said, it pretty much leaches out fatty acids into the bloodstream. You could burn off those fatty acids through exercise or through better dietary interventions, which lower your inflammation and your insulin resistance markers. And you could actually re-esterify that in subcutaneous fat more preferentially. So you can actually, there are research studies that have looked at aerobic training and resistance training, and they've lowered visceral adipose tissue or visceral fat without actual weight loss. So this is something that you could use as an intervention. The best way to target it is actually to lose body fat. However, if you're someone that you're just starting your journey, just by becoming more active, by optimizing your hormones, and by becoming, someone that resistance trains regularly, you could redistribute your fat from more metabolically unhealthy fat to more metabolically healthy fat. And despite the fact that no one wants subcutaneous fat, really, when we look at it from a health perspective, visceral adipose tissue is much more harmful and deleterious than our subcutaneous fat.
Correct.
Subcutaneous fat is just ugly fat because you see it visibly, but visceral fat is what's more linked to, metabolic diseases and things that will actually impair your longevity. So granted, guys, we all want to look better, but in order to get to a place where we can look better, we have to be able to last long enough to do so. So, we have to put health first. And that's why, I call my coaching method a health-centric coaching model. And this is all about optimizing all of these areas.
Yeah. The biggest thing is in these situations is protecting your liver, because the liver is the first place that gets insulin resistant. And then once that starts going, you get cascade effects. Now, have you seen the literature showing that like high intensity cardio burns visceral fat better than per se like steps or steady state? Have you seen anything like that or no?
No, usually the interventions are on equal dose duration, meaning it will usually be like 45-minute sessions of aerobic training, which would be at a low intensity steady state or moderate intensity steady state, versus 45 minutes of resistance training. When we see those interventions, there are ones done with and without dietary modulation, meaning some are done independently. It's just an exercise intervention. And then some are done with diet and exercise. With diet and exercise, we see an enhancement of overall fat loss, including visceral fat loss. But even in the studies that are just taking sedentary individuals that are metabolically unhealthy and putting them in exercise interventions, we see that it increases their insulin sensitivity for up to 24 to 48 hours, with resistance training having a little bit longer of a duration of insulin sensitizing benefits than aerobic training. But aerobic training actually helps with losing more visceral fat because of the fact that we have to think about the energy substrates that are utilized during these different forms of exercise. So let's look at it from a mechanistic perspective. Aerobic training relies off what's called aerobic metabolism, meaning it utilizes fatty acids for its main fuel source because it's done at a lower intensity. So you're mobilizing and you're oxidizing, meaning burning more fat. Whereas when we get into higher threshold of intensities, like your HIIT training or like resistance training, that is anaerobic metabolism, meaning it relies off glucose. It relies off stored glycogen in the muscle itself. So you're going to liberate more glucose into the bloodstream to be burned off as energy and less fatty acids.
Yep. No, I appreciate you clearing all that, because I know visceral fat's something that I see a lot more of prevalent, especially in men with the low T. Yeah, with low T and high T, depending upon what they were doing. Because gym pop people do a gram of test a week. Oddly enough, I found that out recently, but nonetheless, let's get on the stage. Yeah, no, Brandon's eyes right now tell you everything. Yep, swear to God, I had a dude in. He's like, let's chat with him, and he's like, yeah, I've been taking like a gram of tests. I just don't feel good. I'm like, holy shit.
All right, on to the next topic.
On next topic. So the stages of fat loss. What fat we lose first in a fat loss phase? I think this probably is going to like blow some people's minds when you get into this on this topic.
Yeah. So what we have to realize is body fat is lost in stages. And just like fat, weight loss in general is not a linear process, neither is fat loss. So there are stages that we need to go through. A lot of people don't realize this, but I'm going to go into both the science behind it and then also, I'll give a case study with a client of mine. And so we generally get lean from the inside out and the top down, which is why you'll usually notice someone's face, arms, and delts will get lean before their midsection, especially their low abs and their low back, and then their legs get lean. And this is because the different types of fat that we just covered and where they're located differ in how easily they store fat in, how much blood flow they get, which impacts our ability to lose fat in that area, and then how easily fat is liberated and burned out of those areas. So first and foremost, visceral fat is the first fat we lose, especially if someone has a high amount of body fat and is quite overweight. And this is because, as I was mentioning previously, visceral fat has a higher amount of blood flow. So it's easy to not only store extra energy in this tissue, but also easy to mobilize fatty acids out of, which is why we generally lose visceral fat first when we enter a fat loss phase. Now, this has both pros and cons to it. So visceral fat, if we look at it from a health perspective, it's our most metabolically unhealthy fat that we can have and is the most harmful to our health. So losing it first is beneficial from a metabolic perspective. However, due to the fact that visceral fat is the fat that's stored around our internal organs, when we lose it, we can't notice the fat loss as well visually as we do with subcutaneous fat. So on the one hand, we're fortunate that out of all the types of body fat that we can gain or lose, visceral fat is the easiest type to mobilize because it has that good supply of blood flow. Now, the one drawback to that is that due to the fact that most are losing visceral fat in the first phase of a diet, they can be making progress, but not see it as well visually because they're losing fat internally, which is not as visual to the naked eye, especially if someone's not experienced. So actually, I had a client a few years back who I helped lose a little over 60 pounds. This was a female, so this was quite a substantial amount of her weight. And so we did it over the course of multiple dieting phases. So I would take her through a 12-week dieting phase. We'd enter a maintenance phase for 8 to 12 weeks. Then we go back into fat loss. And it was done in chunks. So I wasn't taking her throughout the whole course of a year in a deficit, but we were going back and forth between phases, getting little chunks of fat loss off. And in the first few months of her first initial fat loss phase, she had lost around 20 pounds. So within like 3 months, she lost 20 pounds, which was a great rate. But I remember her coming to me at the end of that 12-week period and telling me she was frustrated as she wasn't visually seeing the progress in her hips and thighs. And it really took me explaining this whole process to her because she didn't realize that that wasn't the body fat she was going to lose first. And so I had to get it through to her that it wasn't until she was going to get deeper into her fat loss journey that we would see visual progress within these hips and thigh region because that was the area of stubborn body fat. But when I pointed out other metrics to her, this is why it's important to look at other things. So first of all, she had lost 20 pounds off the scale. So we know that she was losing fat because she was actually had introduced resistance training. So she probably lost more than 20 pounds of fat because she was gaining muscle throughout that course. She was changing her body shape. Her clothing was fitting better in terms of her legs, in terms of her arms, but around her waist, she had lost a substantial, this woman lost inches and inches off her waist. And that's where I pulled it back to. And I explained to her about visceral adipose tissue, about visceral fat, and the fact that it's centrally located in that abdominal cavity. So the fact that her waist went from like 36 inches down to 31 within the first fat loss phase, we had her 30. She had substantially lost, she lost, 15 or 17, between 15 and 17% of her waist size just within the first few months. So she had made phenomenal progress. Now, here's the other thing. This is why I'm big into biometric tracking because we need to look at other things other than just scale weight, other than body fat metrics, other than just these visual things, because we have to realize that there are multiple components of progress. And one component, especially with lifestyle clients, is improving their health. That's a big reason that they come to us. So what we also saw was a massive improvement in her markers of metabolic health. So we saw an improvement in blood glucose. The woman was pre-diabetic before she came to me. She was back into normal ranges of blood glucose in terms of acid and postprandially. Her HbA1c had went down significantly. She was over 5.7. So she was technically in that diabetes range or that type 2 diabetes range. And her fasted insulin was through the roof when she came to me. It was almost out of range. She was at like 23 or 24, which, Jeff, you know how high that is.
Yeah.
We were down to about 8 or 9, which is a substantial improvement. It's within the healthy range. by the time she finished that first fat loss phase. So I had all these other markers and I said, listen, you're not seeing your hips and thighs come down, but you're losing fat all over, but you're losing the most unhealthy fat.
Right.
And now you have set yourself up. We have primed you to be more metabolically healthy and more responsive. After we get through this maintenance phase, we wash off that dietary fatigue. Now you're going to be in a spot where you're going to be better able to now see the visual progress that you want from an aesthetic point of view. But first, we need to improve your health because, like I always say, a healthy body is a responsive body. So the next type of fat that we start losing is subcutaneous fat. And the majority of the fat that most of us desire is, during a fat loss phase, is the subcutaneous fat, which is that fat that's under the skin and that's most visible. So this fat will start being lost after we lose visceral fat. Now, in some individuals, if you're a lean, healthy individual, you probably don't have much visceral fat. So you're going to be able to tap into subcutaneous fat a lot quicker than someone that carries excess adiposity. But even with subcutaneous fat, we'll generally lose this in stages or in chunks. So usually we start getting lean at our extremities, like our arms and our delts and then our calves, which all have a really good supply of blood flow. Think about it. Like a lot of times when I explain this to clients, sometimes they're thinking, well, why wouldn't I have blood flow all over? But let's think about it like this. Where do you get better pumps? In your arms or in your stomach when you do abs? You know what I mean? Like when you do curls, you're going to get a better pump in your arms and your delts than you do when you do ab work. So we have to think about it. So from a blood flow perspective, your extremities, you're going to have better blood flow to those areas, especially let's look at our outer extremities for males, like our forearms. We have guys that have 20+% body fat. So they're at a higher body fat percentage, but they have really lean vascular forearms. And that's because there's really good blood flow to those areas. And then once we have lost body fat in those areas, so we generally will lose more fat from those outer areas, and then we'll start working more like centrally. Yes. So we'll get to areas like our chest. And then from there, we start getting into larger, more central regions of subcutaneous fat, like the abs, the low back, the hips, and the thighs. And this is because certain areas of our body require more time to lean out and lose fat from than others. And these are the stubborn body fat regions. And really, when it comes down to it, we're going to go through like the subject of stubborn body fat. However, we need to be patient and get lean enough first to start losing fat from these areas. So before we go into stubborn body fat, do realize that you have to be patient with the process because we can't just trick our body into, losing fat from wherever we want it. You know what I mean?
I wish that we could. And I think that that's what confuses a lot of people because when they talk, about like, I wish, the scales is a good tool, right? But people in their fixation to it, I'm like, but if you look better at 180 and you've weighed 180 the whole time, they, like you said, like if people lean up in areas, they're always pissed off about some stuff. But I think it's probably important that we talk about stubborn body fat. But I did want to ask you a question real quick. Since you brought that up about, areas that lose body fat are hotter than areas that I guess are colder, what did you think of the products like Vasoburn that you rub on and like heat up and so forth? Like, Matt Porter, RIP, that was like his theory behind the Yohimbe and stuff like that was to help heat those areas up to get the fatty acids liberated in the bloodstream. Just curious what your thoughts are.
Yeah, so Jeff, I think you misheard me. I never said areas that are hotter than others. I said areas with better blood flow.
Better blood flow. Okay, so therefore, I'm associating blood flow at that point, like getting hotter, because I know, for example, yeah. So that's what I was saying. So sorry about that. I had that backwards.
No, it's all good. There is conflicting data on those type of creams. And the reason I'll say that, have I utilized them and found success with them? Yes, but I'm doing a million other things. So I'm not utilizing it as an isolated variable. There is some research that looks at spot reduction creams, and it looks to be that it's not the actual ingredients in them, except for one key ingredient, which we'll actually do a podcast next week about. I don't want to hint at it yet because we do have, the next topic is going to be strategies for stubborn fat loss, which would be another hour.
Fine. You guys have to tune in again next week. Sorry, guys.
I will say there is some research on stubborn body fat and on the topic of spot reduction, which actually has been disproven in the research, but there is some specific research on products like it's not on Vasoburn. I forget the actual product. It's something with an L. But it didn't seem to be the actual ingredients, but the fact that there was better blood flow brought to those areas. So it's almost like the same concept as wearing one of those not waist trainers. Do you know what those sweat belts? It's just heating up that area which heat can increase blood flow. So we see that even in the context of like a sauna, we see increased vasodilation. So the opening of blood vessels through the usage of sauna, which also increases heat shock protein. So these all have, and it also increases nitric oxide. So things like that can increase blood flow. So mechanistically, it may be able to work, but then there's also research that goes against that, which really shows that spot reduction cannot happen. So even when you isolate an area, so for instance, there's research that looks at doing crunches, and will you lose body fat from doing, not just crunches. I'm utilizing crunches as a generic ab training exercise. However, there was a research study that did 6 weeks of 5 days per week intense ab training and looked at people, their body fat percentages in the central region, both pre and post study testing, and did not see any difference. And it really comes down to, yes, you could build muscle in areas. So we do see in certain studies that ab training can increase the muscle, the cross-sectional area of muscle. So you can increase your ab size. But like everyone always says, abs are made in the kitchen. And the reason for that is you need a deficit to lose body fat. So it's not like you can just specifically target one singular area. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I know exactly what I mean. Would you like to actually talk about the subject of stubborn body fat, since we're kind of like
Absolutely.
nailing it around on it? I am interested to know the topic about next week, so I'm gonna have to bug you about that, because I suspect I know what you're going to talk about, but I can't reveal it with you. It's not acid or shrooms or anything cool, but it's a cool subject.
Yeah, let's not hit too much because I already have enough questions. I believe me, the question list that I got this week on my Q&A was so long that it had to be divided up in two.
Yeah,
So,
no, I understand.
because if not, you would be killing me for how long it took. But yeah, really when we think about it, and Jeff, I'm sure you could say the same thing. Over the years, one of the most common questions I've received from individuals, whether it be in the gym or online with clients, is, what can they do? Or even the case that you just said, like, what can you take to lose, to target body fat from a specific body part or region of their body that they struggle with? And I'm sure that's why you were hinting at Vasoburn and different products, because
Correct.
you see that those are popular online and probably with clients. And we have to really think about it. We have to look into the topic of stubborn body fat. So with men, the areas that they usually want to specifically lose fat from are their lower abs, their low back, and their love handles, because that's where we struggle. Whereas
Right.
with women, they usually want to lose fat from their hips and thighs. And unfortunately, just with the research we have, it's not possible to specifically lose fat from a specific area. So it's not like we can go onto a specific diet or do a specific exercise like crunches to target fat loss from our abs, or to target one specific area that we don't like or that we find unsightly. Fat loss in and of itself is a process that happens in stages, and we have to realize that and accept it. That's how physiology works. That's how the physiology of fat loss works. So in order to lose stubborn body fat, we first need to lose enough fat mass in total that we get to a lower body fat percentage where our body has less fat stores to pull from and is more likely to pull fat from those stubborn areas which have more fat in them and that are left over. So this is where we really get into the topic of body fat distribution and storage patterns, because first, before we get into what causes stubborn body fat, we have to realize that there are gender specific differences. So it's not just like this subjective thing, like, yes, men will generally report, hey, listen, I see, or I struggle with my low abs or my low back, like you mentioned. Or with
Right.
women, it's generally their hips and thighs, but there's reasons for that.
And are we going to say that some of it's hormonal? What are some of the reasons for it?
So actually, when we look at body fat distribution and storage, it's highly influenced and determined by our genetics and then especially our gender. So,
Right.
males and females will both store and lose fat differently in terms of where they store it as well as where they lose it from. So when you look at the fat storage pattern in males, we tend to see what's called an android fatty fat distribution, which is also referred to as the apple shape. I'm sure like anyone out there has
Right.
heard that. We send, because we typically store fat centrally around that core region, which includes our stomach and low back, whereas we store less fat in our arms and our legs, and especially towards our outer extremities like our forearms and calves, which is why regardless of how lean or how much body fat a male has, they generally have pretty lean calves that still have veins, pretty lean forearms. Since males store more fat centrally around the gut and organs, we tend to gain more visceral fat when gaining an excessive amount of fat, which is why we have higher associations of insulin resistance and cardiovascular disease, especially in comparison to females. Now, females, on the other hand, have a different fat storage pattern than males, and they have what's referred to as a gynoid body fat distribution, which is
Hmm.
also referred to as the pear shape. as they store more body fat in their lower body and especially around their hips and thighs. And this is more of the subcutaneous fat, so the jiggly fat, you know what I mean? More of the visceral fat, which
Right.
is less unhealthy fat, but it's also harder to liberate and burn, which is why many females struggle to lose this fat, especially in comparison to males. So I can't tell you how many times that I've worked with couples and they've both went into a fat loss phase. And we have to realize there's so many genetic or gender differences between males and females. Women are not little men. I've went on podcasts talking about female physiology. They are not little men. We have to realize that. And so their calorie intake, the deficit we can create with them, their metabolic rate, all these different things in comparison on a lean body mass ratio, yes, they're very equivalent. But when we look at it from an overall perspective and a proportional perspective, if I was to put a male and female and I tried to target the same rate of loss, I tried to lose a pound of body fat in a husband and a wife. If her maintenance calorie intake is 1,500 calories and his is 3,000, I put him at a 500 calorie deficit. He gets the 2,500 calories while his wife's on 1,000 calories. It's just not realistic. So we have to take different approaches. But when it comes to body fat patterns and body fat storage mechanisms, women essentially store, fat more in this, lower region of the lower body,
Right.
because this is essentially a storage, like an energy storage depot that women were meant to have from an evolutionary perspective. So they had enough stored energy on board for when they got pregnant. That's when that fat would get liberated.
Hmm.
So the hormonal patterns that influence this body fat distribution pattern tend to protect women from experiencing as many metabolic diseases as men. Because even if we think about it from an evolutionary perspective, like women were the ones that were going to help the survival of our species. Like men, we were just needed to plant the seed essentially, but they needed to continue the race. Our species, and so really when it comes down to it, we see that women have better metabolic health for the same proportional amount of body fat than males do, because they store body fat more as subcutaneous rather than visceral adipose tissue. But that changes in menopause when this distribution pattern changes and we start seeing females. I'm sure you can relate to this because I've worked with many females that were in menopause or postmenopausal, and that's when we start seeing them store more fat centrally. And this is due to the sudden decline in estrogen during menopause. So this hormonal change, where estrogen was initially the main, dominant hormone, and now the fluctuation has went down to a minimum, is one reason as to why women start storing more fat in the central region during menopause. And so we see that distribution difference.
Yeah, they lose their butt and get a gut. It's usually kind of like what, no, it really is what it is. Like, and you can see it with women like in their 60s, 70s when out in public. And if you read this book, because I've interviewed Dr. J before, the author of Estrogeneration. It was a book called Estrogen Matters, I think. And it was basically like a couple, and they were doctors, and they were just tearing apart the study done about women being on hormone replacement therapy and just discussing like how that's very important for women to get on it earlier. It's a very interesting book if you're ever into it. It's very research science based. So I know you would appreciate it. But I appreciate you breaking that down on that. Now, my question becomes, is there anything else that we want to clean up on the subject's body fat or stubborn body fat and the different fat storage pattern differences between males, females? Or do we want to go on to our final topic? What makes certain regions of fat more stubborn than others?
Yeah, I think we should go on to the last topic, because honestly, that is the moneymaker first and foremost, and that's really what's going to explain all these other mechanisms. So,
Yeah,
really,
say.
before we're able to get into next week's topic, if you guys listen to anything, listen to the next 10 minutes where I break this down, because this is something that I very rarely seen or heard anyone else speak about, and this is something that's pretty mechanistic, but I'm going to break it down in the most simple physiological mechanisms that I can, and then also you're going to realize like why certain regions of fat are more stubborn than others. And that's a huge thing. And we have to be aware of this, because my biggest thing with education is that it helps to empower others. So I always say that an educated client is an empowered and a compliant client. And that's why I focus so much on education with my clients. But what we have to realize is there's so many people that are unhappy with their body fat or their body shape. And they don't realize that a lot of times you just have to be patient. And there are reasons as to why you might be seeing certain what you consider bottlenecks or what you consider challenges. And these are all, can be explained for the most part by either your physiology or your psychology. But if you can get your psychology in the right mind, in the right place, like if you have the mindset to know that, hey, listen, There's going to be areas that are more difficult to break into or to burn body fat from than others, but these are the reasons why. And if I stick it out, so I hope that anyone out there that is on a fat loss journey, instead of getting discouraged by the fact that there's stubborn body fat, and you might have thinking that you're an outlier or you're a special snowflake that just happens to store body fat.
A special snowflake.
when I explain why that these things happen and exactly the areas, the receptors, and the reasons as to why stubborn body fat is stubborn, maybe it will make you realize, hey, listen, everyone within my gender for the most part is going to experience this. And if I just keep pushing through my fat loss phase and get to a lean enough state, I will get through to this. And what we have to realize, who are the people that never complain about stubborn body fat, Jeff?
Who complains about stubborn body fat?
Who are the people that never complain about stubborn body fat, that we never hear that have stubborn body fat problems or that hoard fat in certain places? I'll tell you, competitors.
Competitors, because we understand what has to happen.
Not only that, because they get lean enough. That's the blunt.
That's true, though. But I can speak to this. I'll be curious your thoughts, because I've talked to Keegan about this, because Keegan wants to compete, right? And he's 11 going on 12. And I even talked about this with my older son. I was like, guys, I'm totally for it, but you guys will never look at food or your bodies the same to some degree. Like once you get that peeled inside out, it's hard when you start gaining body fat back, and you have to, so you make peace with it. But I agree with that. Like gym pop people all the time. Well, I don't want to get bulky. I just want to build here and lose there. I'm like, it doesn't work like that. If it did, I'd be a $1 billion coach and I wouldn't even have a gym.
Here's the thing. So, I love the fact that I work with so many more lifestyle clients, and I take a lot of the principles that I learned from bodybuilding within my own practice, within applying it to my life to them. But I always differentiate because there's a level of extremes that I wouldn't want a gen pop or a lifestyle client to go through. However, the mindset that there are times to build and there's a time to burn, and also that you need to be process oriented. A lot of competitors understand that, especially as they get deeper into the game, like you and I did, where they understand that there's going to be setbacks, there's going to be limitations, and there's many reasons as to why I cover the topics that I generally cover. I cover a lot on things like metabolic adaptation because I want to shed light on these topics that many think are these bottlenecks they're never going to be able to overcome. And there's a lot of mindset issues. And this is something I really work on with my clients. Your mindset can make or break you. If you think that there is an unsurmountable challenge, like you have a damaged metabolism, or you have a slow metabolism, or you are predisposed towards fat gain, or you have always been, a yo-yo dieter that regains all this body fat. The reason I dive deep into these topics and I speak both on the mechanisms, the physiology, and then the psychology of them, as well as the practical applications of how to approach them better, is because I really want people to understand why these things are happening and to shed these misconceptions that they have in their head and these self-limiting beliefs that they believe that they're the only one that deals with this, or this is uncommon and I'm the only one experiencing this and that this is unfair. And also so that they open up their eyes to the fact that you can attain anything you want in this life. There are, especially when it comes to getting lean, there was just a research study that looked at the genetics behind fat loss. And what they showed was when it comes to muscle building, there are certain genetic limitations where we do see certain responders and lower responders. And there was some research early on in the 80s and 90s that showed that there were non-responders. But really when they went through a reanalysis of that data, what they really saw when they followed back up with very tightly controlled studies that reanalyzed it, what they showed was it wasn't that these people were complete non-responders. They were non-responders to the cookie cutter program that they were given in the study. However, if they were to do more volume, so they saw this both in the Heritage trial, which was an aerobic training trial, so doing endurance work, they saw that if they did more volume, those people would see comparable increases in VO2 max. Would they be the outlier that was the hyper responder? No, but it was just two different genetic, pools essentially. And what we have to realize is the same thing as with other sports. When we look at basketball, like Jeff, no offense, you knew you weren't going to go to the NBA, like due to your height.
I don't know, Spud Webb, man, he was kind of inspirational for me. I'm just kidding.
But for most sports, we look at it and we say, all right, well, some people, this could be a passion that I have that I pursue. I have so many clients that I've gotten into to get their need up. I get them back into the intramural sports that they loved in college or in high school. And
I
I
do
get
the
them into
same
intramural
thing and
leagues
they love
and,
it.
and they love it, but
Yeah.
they had stopped competing because they were not able to take it to the next level. So after college, they didn't go to the NFL. I had so many friends. I lived with the college football team. There's a lot of my friends that for a few years after college, because they didn't get into the league and they did a pro day, they tried out and they didn't make it, they were disheartened. But also at the same time, they were a lot more realistic with their expectations because they knew it was just that 1%. So many of us realize that there's a difference in genetics between myself and an NFL running back. Whereas when it comes to physique enhancement, a lot of times we don't think about the genetic factors that could limit us, but also you're not looking at the mental factors that are limiting you. And so what you have to realize is we all have a different set of cards. You have to play your hands to the best of your ability, and understanding these things are going to better explain them. But to go back on genetics, there was a recent study that looked at fat loss. And if fat loss is inhibited by genetics, and it literally showed that anyone can get lean. Not everyone can get very muscular. Not everyone will get very muscular. They'll increase a proportion of muscle mass in comparison to their starting baseline. But if you started at 110 pounds and someone else started at 180 pounds without any resistance training, most likely the 180-pound person that had 70 pounds of higher lean body mass at baseline will probably end up at a higher or a ending point that is bigger than yours at 110. However, we all can get lean, and that's what really most of these studies have showed. And even the studies we've covered the FTO gene, and it only impacts like it's like 1 to 2 kilograms when
Correct.
people have the double allele, meaning you're going to be 1 to 2 kilograms heavier in terms of BMI than you would be if you didn't have the most genetically linked genotype for body fat. So realize, guys, everyone can get lean, and just understanding these things will allow you to realize, hey, listen, most of the things that are limiting me aren't my genetics, aren't these, special snowflake circumstances, aren't these, unique challenges and setbacks. They are my mindset because I'm unwilling to continue along the process. If you guys, anything in life, it's about, consistency over time, especially when it comes to fat loss, because fat loss happens in stages and the stages take time. So if you want to break into that stubborn body fat, the reason I say I don't want to just isolate competitors, the reason I say that competitors don't have issues with stubborn body fat is because they generally do longer diets. They're generally more consistent. They're especially more consistent with their calorie tracking and their accuracy to their
It's
calorie
true.
targets. And they realize that this is a process that takes a long time. It isn't 1 week on the diet, 1 week off the diet. It isn't 5 days of the week they're on plan and then they're completely off the wagon on weekends and they're a weekday dieter, a weekend binge eater. You know what I mean? These are all things that are holding you back. And what you have to realize is this needs to be looked at as a long-term process that you can make progress in, but you have to do it. It's a daily accumulation of reps. It's reps in the gym, reps in the kitchen, reps with your meals, and reps in consistency in all aspects of your habits, your behaviors, and your actions.
I agree, man. And most people don't want to push hard enough to get lean, at least that first time through,
It's not easy.
No, even gym pop people, like I found when they gain, like say, for example, they're like a good 50 pounds overweight. Like those first 20 will come easy, but to get the next 10 is very, very hard for them. And you generally will have to get that 10 and then pull back a little bit and kind of let them recalibrate before you shove again. Where it's different with a competitor. Like I look at it like if you want to compete, this is what it takes to compete at a high level. Like my little legally disabled, crippled ass gets on stage with a shitty left leg and I still can get peeled out of my mind. So there's no excuse as far as I'm concerned when you do it. It's all mental, and like I told someone, I was talking to my buddy. He's like, man, don't you just get tired of like showing up to try to get your pro card? Because I'm going to go for it again next year. No, it's going to be hard for you, that left leg. I'm like, yeah, man. But like the photos of me like
You know how
shredded
much
up there
more
next to other
fulfilling?
people. It is. It's
And
just
that's
way
what
more
people don't
fulfilling.
get. A
Yeah.
lot of times people focus on the momentary discomfort that is happening in the moment, the times you're starving, that you wake up in the middle of the night and that you're super hungry. And these are things that most people that haven't gotten 5% or leaner really don't understand, like true physiological hunger, not psychological hunger, not cravings, what I'm talking about. But when you push those limits and you overcome those setbacks and you realize that you could push yourself physically more than you ever thought
Right.
you were capable of. And also you realize that it wasn't only physical things that you did, it was mental growth that you attained through that process. You'll realize that you could apply those skills and that growth and development to all aspects of your life, and you could better yourself in business, in your relationships, in other hardships that you face, because it's not just challenges you're going to face in the gym. And what I really, I really try to get to my across my clients is a lot of them embrace challenges in the gym, like when they have to really push themselves for a new PR, or they're
Right.
progressive overloading, or they're looking to add a rep every week to a set or another set, or they're trying to, add 2.5 pounds or 5 pounds to the bar every single week. However, when they find the same, they don't take that same progressive overload to a dieting phase. But when they can shift their mindset and realize every week should be a little bit more challenging, I should push myself just a little bit further to eke out a little bit more progress. The body is an adaptive system. You have to do more than you did previously to be able to get further than you are now. So if you just started a diet, the first 20 pounds came off easy, you're going to have to put, your body's going to adapt, especially metabolically.
Yep.
You have to push a little bit harder. But at the same time, for every, you lost 20 pounds to begin with, but for every now 10 pounds that you lose, it's a greater proportion of body fat that you've lost because you have less body fat on your body. So now instead of every 20 pounds, every 10 pounds, so half the amount of weight you initially lost, you look substantially leaner. And then you get to a point, and I've gotten here with a lot of my lifestyle clients, where they had been yo-yo dieters. They had been back and forth between different phases where they would lose a little bit of weight, regain that weight. They were losing and regaining the same 10, 15 pounds. They never saw the fruits of their labor, and they also never were able to maintain them long enough. But now they went through a successful fat loss phase where we lost 20 plus pounds, and now they saw a different version of themselves physically and mentally. But here's the other thing with that. What they saw was they started seeing that initially they're not seeing a lot of progress because they were at a higher percentage of body fat than they wanted to be. So it comes slow at first. Like they're seeing a lot of scale weight loss, but not visual loss. But they get to that last 5 pounds that they have to lose, and every day they look visually better. And that is a dopamine producing and a really rewarding thing. And I'm not saying that that's everything about it, but really when you get to that place where you realize you could literally look different day to day, week to week, it is such a fulfilling feeling because you know that all those other challenges that you overcame in the beginning of that dieting phase, the first few months, at times you wanted to give up and just go back to your old style of eating and acting and behaving and not doing the steps and not hitting the workouts. You realize that it all paid off, and it's going to continue paying off more and more as you go further.
I'll be honest with you. I tell everybody this, then we got to wrap it up. I got some breaking news before we close. I honestly, in my heart, tell every single person this. Bodybuilding taught me to work through the hard shit that allowed me to succeed in business. When you're in those extreme discomfort and the weeks become just sludgingly shit and you're just like, why am I doing this again? It allowed me to have that temperance to still look down the road and say, well, I need to do this because of XYZ. So, guys, even your physical goals can turn into amazing goals in other areas of your life. You could really translate this down. But my breaking news, it's unraveling the muscle growth mystery, reps, sets, volumes, and frequency. Dr. Scott Stevenson just emailed me with his topic.
Very nice.
So that'll be a good one, man. Dude, Scott was great in Nashville. You were there. So
is there anything?
Yeah, no shit. Is there
let's go back. Let's tie this up so we can
sure.
End this
episode. Tie it up.
Let's go to essentially, explaining. Sorry for the detour, guys. I have ADD, and Jeff is terrible with keeping me on track. So we are back.
We just have it's like just bullshitting on outside to me sometimes, man.
Podcast. But essentially, what we wanted to really cover was what makes certain regions of fat more stubborn than others. So, to get back to more of the topic, of hand for today, we've all noticed, and I'm sure anyone out there that's listening to this, Jeff can relate to this, I can relate to this. We've all noticed that we tend to have certain areas that store more fat than others. And these are the same areas many of us struggle to lose fat from as easily during a fat loss phase. When we first lose fat, we lose it from the inside out, as I mentioned before. And this is because these are the regions with body fat that's the easiest to mobilize and burn. And then we start tapping into deeper areas of stubborn body fat, which are the areas that are more difficult to lose fat from. And the presence of stubborn body fat is why it isn't until we get much deeper into a diet and much leaner that we start losing that top layer of fat around the lower abs and low back and love handles for men, and then the hips and thighs for women. And areas like our low back, or our lower abs, our hips, our thighs, our glutes, these are all regions that have stubborn subcutaneous fat, which is more difficult to lose body fat from as compared to other areas like our arms and our delts. And this is for two main reasons. The first reason, which I've kind of hit on briefly, was these stubborn fat containing areas receive less blood flow in them than other areas in the body, which makes it harder to mobilize and burn fat from. And blood flow is really important to fat loss, as we can mobilize fatty acids out of a fat cell, but we need sufficient blood flow for those fatty acids to be transported from that area to somewhere like our muscles, where they can then be burned for energy. But
Mhm.
there's also a second factor, a second reason as to why we have stubborn body fat that many people don't realize or they overlook. It's because these stubborn fat regions have a greater density of a type of fat cell receptor that's more resistant to fatty acid mobilization, making them harder to burn off. So, meaning they're not letting fatty acids out of the cell. So, if we can't get fatty acids out of the cell, you can't burn them. You can't lose body fat from those areas. So, there are two types of adrenal receptors that can be found in fat cells. We have both alpha and beta receptors, which are the adrenal
Correct.
receptors, which allow hormones called catecholamines to bind to and exert their actions on. And so I'll break down both of them so you guys understand, because one acts as a stimulatory action and one acts as an inhibitory action. So beta receptors are stimulatory receptors, meaning that when they get binded to and activated by catecholamines, they increase lipolysis and thermogenesis, and they allow for fatty acids to be mobilized out of fat cells to be burned for energy. Now, on the other hand, we have the alpha receptors, and these are inhibitory receptors, meaning when alpha 2 receptors are stimulated and activated, they act in an inhibitory manner where they limit lipolysis and blunt the mobilization of fatty acids out of the fat cell. So, a simple way to think about these adrenal receptors are, and this is how I always remember it is, beta receptors act as the gas pedal. So, when they're activated, they raise our heart rate, they increase calorie expenditure, they allow for the breakdown of fatty acids, and they actually improve blood flow by increasing our blood vessel size. So, these are when our catecholamines, which are they help stimulate our sympathetic nervous system. They're going to allow for all these sympathetic actions. They're going to get us into that fight or flight state where we're liberating energy and we're burning it. Whereas our alpha receptors act as the brake. So when they're bound to by catecholamines, they slow everything down. So they're blocking the mobilization of fat. They're decreasing calorie expenditure, and they decrease blood flow by constricting our blood vessels. So the ratio of beta to alpha receptors in a specific fat tissue is what determines how easy it is to mobilize fat from that area and burn it. So, when we look at the differences between males and females, we both have alpha receptors and beta receptors, but we have them in different regions, which is what makes a female and a male have different stubborn fat areas. So, for example, for females, their alpha receptors are more commonly found in their hips and thighs, whereas for men, they're more commonly found in the abdominal region. And due to these areas having a higher density and amount of alpha 2 receptors, these areas are harder to mobilize fat out of and also have poorer blood flow. So, this is why many struggle with stubborn fat in these areas. And if we really think about it, like think about those areas, you're not getting a lot of blood flow. It's not like you're getting a crazy pump in your hips and thighs or in your low back and unless you took Dianabol and you have a bad low back pump. You know what I mean? These areas aren't places that we're able to really isolate and get really good blood flow. And these are areas that a lot of people don't really train either. So, for example, females, like when we look at the literature, females' hips and thighs can have up to 9 times as many alpha receptors as beta receptors, which makes this area even harder for them to lose fat from. So, this is why, it's important to realize this because it isn't until the end of a fat loss phase that we can start to lose these stubborn areas because we've already lost the majority of fat in other areas.
It's
So
true.
then we put our body in a place where, remember, our body always is going to preferentially go for survival over everything else. So if you're at a body fat, like say you've gotten very lean. So for men, you're at 10% body fat or less. With females, you're at 20% body fat or less, or give or take. If you're already at these very lean body fat percentages, what's going to end up happening is you're not going to have a lot of body fat in those areas that are easy to liberate. So your delts are going to be ripped. Your biceps and arms are going to be ripped. Your chest is going to be lean. We're going to see this with females. The rest of their body, females already have their abs in quicker than men do. They usually, I've had female clients that they have a six pack or full abs before their husband does. And so now you don't have that body fat to liberate from. So now preferentially the body has to go in and tap into those stubborn body fat areas. And we actually have research that looks at, called an inverse relationship between the two. And I'll try to bring up the study if I could find it for next week's podcast. But essentially, what it shows is as we get leaner, our blood flow to body fat actually becomes greater. So the leaner you are, especially to the abdomen, the leaner you are, and the more body fat you have lost, the greater the flow, the amount of blood flow that you actually get to your abs. So you're going to be more and more likely to lose body fat from that area. So guys, just keep in mind, this is a process of patience. You need to be patient, push hard enough, long enough, and you will see these stubborn body fat areas lost. It's not like you're never going to get rid of these areas. You just have to diet long enough, stay consistent long enough with the calorie deficit, and then lose enough total body fat where your body's going to have no other option, and you're going to lose that fat. There's no other way about it. So for all those that were interested in stubborn body fat, this was the science of body fat, or of stubborn body fat. We have dove deep into this, and next week we're going to cover a little bit more of an expanded aspect of this topic.
I'm all looking forward to it, man. Did you ever read Lyle McDonald's book on stubborn body fat?
I have not.
It's actually a really good read. He talked about the two different types, the beta and the alpha and all that different stuff. So I'll have to pass you that copy, mail it to you or something like that. I think you like it because I know you're a nerd on some of that stuff. He puts out some good things. But anyway, where can everyone find you at and all that stuff? And guys, like, share, rate, review, all that good stuff.
Absolutely, guys. Feel free to reach out to me on Instagram at @BrandonDeCruz_, or on my email, which is bdecruzfitness@gmail.com. Any questions, any follow-ups you guys have. Honestly, these episodes, the reason we get such similar topics, or not similar topics, but we're able to branch off, is because every week we get follow-up questions regarding the previous week's episode, and then we're able to dive deeper into a topic we have yet to cover. And also, you know what, another thing I really want to say about our audience that I appreciate is you guys ask us questions that I haven't heard covered on other people's podcasts, which keeps our content interesting, unique, and it's challenging, especially for me, because I'm the one doing the research over here. So then I'm looking into things, I'm expanding my knowledge bracket on things, which, this is a full learning process. A lot of times these are topics that I'm already pretty well versed in to begin with. But sometimes I'm like, listen, I just want to challenge, someone will send me a question that's a little bit worded differently, or they have a misconception, or they heard this about something. And then I'm like, listen, I've never heard that. Maybe I should look in and just look at the literature once again, one more time, and see, are they correct or have they been misled? And it challenges my own education of things. And I'm really big into critical thinking. So I love that we're able to get you guys to critically think, but also it helps us critically think. So that's something that we really appreciate about the show, and that we hope that you guys get out of it. So Jeff, tell them where they could find you, my man.
Nah, man, I'm glad they don't ask me any questions because I'm a know-it-all and I would reply so, but I'm just kidding. Anyway, you guys can find me at Jeff Unbreakable Black on IG. I'm actually going to be posting more educational content now that I'm out of the hump of writing my book and in the editing phase. So I have more bandwidth to actually write now. So be sure to give me a follow, engage. And if you guys got any questions, hit me up as well. Same with me. But otherwise, dude, it was a good one. I look forward to seeing you again next week.
Sounds good, brother.
Peace.